So we welcome everybody here today. We're so pleased to have Professor Pierre Brissot with us from France to share his new book, The Iron Odyssey. So welcome, Professor Brissot.
It's a pleasure again to speak to all of you. I realize it was exactly 1 year that I did a previous talk. It was on November 24. And so I invite you to share with me this journey through space and time in the Iron Odyssey. The starting point of the story is, of course, the relationship between iron and human health. And I just want on one slide, a single slide, to recall you the double vulnerability of the human body towards iron. On the one hand, the human body is unable to produce iron, explaining its high propensity to iron deficiency and therefore to anemia. And on the other hand, there is no real draining facilities of iron by the human body, which explains the high propensity of the human body to iron excess and therefore to hemochromatosis. So, having said that, we will forget the iron and human health tonight, and we will really try to fly away to other horizons like this. And I propose that we see successively the iron symbolism. What is really iron? The relationship between iron, earth, and universe. The relationship between iron and the origin of life, and a few words about iron and human society. So first, iron symbolism. When we think of iron, there are in fact two kinds of contradictory meaning. One is more or less related to heaven, and the other one to hell. Let's see first the relationship to heaven or to the sky. This is a celestial meaning of iron, and I will here allude to the problem of iron meteorites. And let's see a few of the well-known and important iron meteorites. So probably the most famous of them is the Tutankhamun dagger. If you see here the Tutankhamun mummy, you will see this red iron, and it's focused on a blade. This is the blade of the dagger of this pharaoh. And you can see here what is the real dagger. In fact, this iron is a meteoritic iron, and the composition is similar to an a meteorite which was found in the area about 2,000 years before Christ. So this is one example of famous iron meteorites. Another one is what we call the Krasnojarsk iron meteorite in Siberia, Russia. And it's important because it is the first iron meteorite which has been described, reported to contain typical iron crystal structure, which is called the Windman-Staton pattern. You see, it's a very special hexaedric pattern of crystal iron. Another example is the Cape York iron meteorite. So we are in northern Greenland, and here an American called Robert Perry discovered with the Inuits 3 major masses of iron meteorite, and one of them was 3 tons. And it took 3 years to Robert Perry to bring back these iron meteorites to New York City, to the American Museum of Natural History. And you will admit that it's a rather crazy process to bring back such things to New York City, and it's rather aberrant. But this is a Cape York iron meteorite. Of course, I cannot completely forget Canada, and you may be aware of the Iron Creek meteorite in Alberta, and this is the image, and it was in fact venerated by the Indian tribes, especially the Cree tribes and the another tribes, it was the Blackfoot Indian tribes, which considers this iron meteorite as a medicine stone. So what about this structure that you recognize, which is the Ayers Rock, the Uluru Ayers Rock? Of course, this rusty aspect does correspond to a thin layer of iron oxide, but the Iron Odyssey is definitely not a meteorite. So having said that, this is a sky approach. A short word about the kind of L meaning. If you consider the Jewish religion culture, it's unexpected, but they really don't like iron at all. And if you look at some sentences of the Torah, it's really said that iron is a negative concept because it evokes the swords, it evokes the cause of death, and it was totally prohibited by the Jewish religious people to use any form of iron to build altars or the first or the second temple, for instance. So this was the first aspect, the iron symbolism. Now, let's turn to what is really iron. And I will first recall you what is an atom of a chemical element. You do know that the atom consists of a nucleus. The nucleus consists itself of red balls, which are positively charged, they are protons, and of green balls, which are neutral and called neutrons. And you know that around this nucleus, you have clouds of electrons. The electrons are negatively charged and they orbit around the nucleus. The chemical symbol of iron, it's of course Fe, and you should know two main points, that what we call the atomic number corresponds to the number of protons, which is totally stable and fixed for iron, and you have 26 red balls in the nucleus of iron, and the other is what we call the atomic mass, is simply the sum, the total of protons and neutrons, and for the most usual form of iron is 56, which means that you have 30 neutrons. 30 neutrons plus 26 protons makes the atomic mass. If you try to locate the chemical element iron among what we call the periodic table, which gathers, collects all the chemical elements of the nature, you see the location of iron here. 26 correspond to the atomic number, and you can see that it is located between 25, the manganese, and 27, the copper. When we are in this quantum aspect of iron, it's important to insist upon two major properties of iron. And these two properties are ferromagnetism on one hand, and what we call the redox potential on the other. And both properties are closely related to electrons. Let's illustrate first what is ferromagnetism. If we come back to the basic, we can say, atom, you have two types of magnetism in a given atom. One is called the orbital magnetism. It is due to the fact that the electrons which rotate around the nucleus deliver some magnetism due to this rotation. So this is the first type. And the second type of magnetism is due to the fact that the electron itself is able to rotate on its own axis. So it's called spin magnetism, and you can see here that you have, depending on the sense of rotation, either an electron spin up or an electron spin down. The important point is that these two types of magnetism do exist for almost every kind of chemical element. But usually, in most cases, the disposition, the assembly of the electron is such that these magnetisms neutralize each other. So they are neutral elements despite this magnetism. But if you consider the iron, it's quite different because the assembly of the electron is such that iron is potentially a very strong magnet, and we will illustrate this very soon. The second property beside magnetism is what we call redox potential. Again, it's absolutely essential when you try to think and to work with iron. You have schematically two types of iron, what we call ferrous iron and ferric iron. Ferrous iron is a reduced form, and ferric iron is the oxidized form, the rust, if you want. And let's explain what is the basis of this difference. When an atom loses an electron, the electron which orbits around the nucleus, it corresponds to oxidation. So in terms of iron, if you start from a reduced iron, a non-oxidized iron, which is ferrous iron, it's designed by Fe2+. If Fe2+, ferrous iron, loses an electron corresponding to oxidation, if it loses an electron, it means that it will gain one positive charge, and so it will be transformed in ferric into ferric iron, which is Fe3+. And this is very important because ferrous iron is a soluble form of iron which can be used by the body, the nature, but ferric iron precipitates, is insoluble and cannot be used as such by a cell, for instance. The reverse phenomenon is a reduction process. You gain one electron, so starting from ferric iron, which is the rust, the oxidized iron with Fe3+, you gain one electron, so you have one positive charge less, and you transform your ferric iron in ferrous iron. And this interaction, this mobility, a very easy change between ferrous and ferric is very crucial process in terms of considering the functionality of iron in nature, especially in human. So we are finished with this chemical, physical aspects, and let's now turn to the third point, which is the relationship between iron, Earth, and universe. And first, between iron and Earth. First point, let's see the iron distribution in Earth. If you consider the different structure of Earth, you have the crust in blue, the mantle, the outer core, and the inner core. You have here the respective approximate dimension of these different structures. But what about iron repartition? You see that iron represents about 6% of the crust, and this corresponds to the fact that iron is the fourth most abundant element in the crust Earth. The other elements are oxygen, are silicon, and aluminum, I think. So if you consider the mantle, you have 10% of iron. In the outer core, you have 80% of iron, and please note that it is liquid iron. You will see in a minute that it's very important. And in the inner core, it's solid iron, 90% of solid iron. In fact, it's kind of alloys, iron and nickel, but iron is really prevailing. So this is the iron distribution. Now the question is to know what is the source of iron on Earth? And in fact, this source comes essentially from the universe, from the space. Let's see this. So the source of Earth iron is essentially the supernova. The supernova correspond to the supergiant stars. And I will just show you what is the process which will lead over the story of the universe, to the arrival of iron from the supernova to the Earth. If you consider the evolution of supergiant stars in the story of the universe, you have several successive steps. You start from the lightest element, the lightest atom, which is the hydrogen atom. And the natural tendency of atoms are to fuse between themselves. And so when hydrogen has this fusion process, it will become an helium atom. And then helium will fuse and produce carbon, etc., etc. And after the silicon step, the last step of this fusion process is the iron core. And then the process stops because iron is highly stable. And so at this step, there is no more energy which is produced by the giant star. If you want, the star is devoid of fuel, it collapses, and you have an iron explosion. And this iron explosion, which is the end of the life of the supernova, will disseminate clouds and myriads of elements in the universe, and especially this iron. And this iron will reach and deposited in the Earth. Another important point of the relationship between iron and Earth is the magnetic field. So we come back to the magnetic problem. We do know that around Earth you have this magnetic field, and we can see that, of course, it's obvious because the Earth has iron in its center. But it's not so simple, because iron by itself, as I told you, is neutral. We do know that we have a piece of iron. It is not a magnet as such. And to become a magnet, iron needs three main conditions. The first one is you need to have a source, an external source, which excites the neutral iron. And this external magnetic field is, in fact, the sun magnetic field. So this is the first condition. You need an external magnetic field, here the sun, given by the sun. The second condition is that you need a movement of iron inside the planet, and this movement is due to the liquid form of iron. It's what the outer core that I stated upon a few seconds ago is very important, because it essentially is because this iron is liquid that you have movement, convections, as it is called. And the third condition for iron to become a magnet, besides the external source of magnetic field, besides the movement, the convection, is the rotation of the Earth itself. So when you have the three conditions, then the iron inside the Earth become magnetic. And you know that this magnetic field is absolutely essential, because it corresponds to a shield which deflects away a lot of potentially toxic high energy particles, which are carried by the solar winds or carried by the cosmic rays, for instance. So it's essential, because without magnetic field, you will not have any atmosphere, and you will be in the condition of Mars that we will see in a few seconds. So let's now turn to other planets and other structures than iron in the universe. And we will consider the three parts. First, we will see some terrestrial planets and only consider Mars, Mercury, and Venus. Then a word of an exoplanet and a word on the asteroid Psyche. Let's start with the terrestrial planets, and first with Mars. So you have here the solar system, and you see the Earth here, and we'll consider first Mars in red. So Mars, of course, it's a red planet, and we think of iron when we think of Mars. But you should know that it's only a very thin layer of a few millimeters of rusty iron, which is in Mars. It's not at all the planet which is rich of iron. And this dusty iron is made of very thin particles, which explains that it's very sensitive to the winds, the solar winds. And this picture here shows you two aspects of Venus, one in June, one in September 2001. It was before and after a major windstorm, a summer storm, and you can see that this wind has displaced, has changed the aspect of Venus. You can find on the surface of Mars iron meteorite, and this meteorite has been called Lebanon because of its form. It's about 2 meters wide. So you have also iron meteorites in Mars. And what about the magnetic field? The magnetic field is almost zero in this planet, and this is because you have in the you have no possibility of convection. As you remember, you have no outer core with liquid iron, and so you lack one of the conditions which are necessary for iron to become magnetic. Let's say a word to Mercury. Mercury is a curious planet. It's, as you see, the smallest solar terrestrial planet. It's also the closest from the sun. And despite this, it's in fact has the biggest Earth core of all these planets, 50% of the planet's radius. The magnetic field is only 1% of that of Earth, and because you have no convection, and this is a planet which is very close to the sun, but very small and very high content of iron. A word about Venus. When we think of Venus, of course, we think of beauty and love, but it's really hell on Venus. Despite the fact that it's similar in size and mass, almost similar to Earth, you have an atmosphere which is full of sulfuric acid, of carbon dioxide. You have extremely high temperatures reaching 500 degrees Celsius. And you know, the temperature is even higher than those of Mercury, despite the fact that Venus is much further from the sun than Mercury. So really, it's a hell on Venus. And the iron core is about 25% of the planet radius, and the magnetic field is almost zero. And here is due to the fact that the rotation of Venus is very slow as compared to the rotation of Earth, since the day on Venus is the equivalent of 243 days on Earth. So it's very slow. And so you have not one of the three conditions which are necessary for iron to become a magnet. We are now on the exoplanet, which is called WASP-76b. It's a very special planet. You know, an exoplanet is a planet which is outside the solar system. So you have in the solar system the terrestrial planets. We have seen 3 of them. You have the extraterrestrial planets, such as Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. But here we are outside the solar system. And what is special with this exoplanet here is iron behavior. If you look just at this artist picture, you see on the left-hand side, it's dark, it's the night on this exoplanet. And on the right-hand side, you have the light, and it's the day coming. And you can see on the left-hand side, the dark, that you have a kind of rain. And in fact, it is iron rain falls, iron rain. Why? Because during the day, the atmosphere is composed of vaporized iron, and during the dark, this vaporized iron condenses and creates really iron rains. So very special planet in terms of iron behavior. A word about the asteroid Psyche. An asteroid, you know, it's a small rocky object which is in the universe and which dates back to the origin of the solar system about 4 billions of years ago. And meteorites may be the consequence of asteroids. And this asteroid is very special because it corresponds to the remnant iron core of a planet. And NASA is quite interested in this asteroid, and it has launched a mission, a spacecraft mission, which is called Lucy, and which is supposed to reach the Psyche in 2026. So let's say a word now to iron and the origin of life. This image here is just to show you one of the fantastic images produced by the James Webb Telescope, and it is from two days ago. In fact, they have the image now of the farthest, so far, the farthest and therefore the oldest galaxy ever seen. And this galaxy probably goes back to 350 billion years after the Big Bang. You know, the Big Bang was 40 billion years ago, and we are here.
I can hear you, dear, but I can't see you.
Sorry? Sorry? You can hear me? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, sorry. So I was just saying that this image is one of the oldest and farthest galaxy ever seen, very close to the Big Bang, which was 14 billion years ago. So let's come back to the relationship between iron and the origin of life. If we try to have an overview, a geological overview of life on Earth, you can see the 4.5 billion of years is the birth of the solar system, and the middle and now. The life emergence and development can be schematized by this curve. And there is an event which has been very important, which is called the Great Oxygen Event. And during this period, you have a massive increase of the oxygen content of the atmosphere. And what is the relationship with iron? You will see that before the Great Oxygen Event, iron was essentially under the ferrous form, the reduced form, the Fe2+ form that we have seen a few minutes ago. And due to the increase of oxygen, it corresponds to an oxidation. And so the ferrous iron will become ferric iron. In other words, before the Great Oxygen Event, you had a lot of ferrous iron, and after the oxygen, so due to the oxidation process, ferrous iron becomes ferric iron. And I told you that it was a major problem for the nature because ferrous iron is soluble, usable, because ferric iron is unusable. And therefore, it's a situation that we do know. If you put a nail in a glass of water, it will precipitate. This is the fate of ferric iron. And we know today that, for instance, in the human body, in order to permit to iron to circulate in the plasma, it must be transported by a special protein and a special boat, which is a shuttle, which is a transferring. And in fact, billion years ago, the nature has produced similar processes to try to render the ferric iron usable by the cells. And this is illustrating the astonishing ability of the nature to adapt to an unusable form of iron. And we can just show it and illustrate this by this scheme. If you have a cell here, a billion years ago, after the Great Oxygen Event, when ferrous iron became ferric iron, then there were two main processes which were created, if I say, to try to use this ferric iron. One is that the cell produces compounds called siderophores, and siderophores are kind of chelators which trap iron, external iron, and are able to enter this iron inside the cell. So this is the first process. And the second process was to avoid that this ferric iron becomes toxic, precipitated in the cell, and so this iron was stored into a protein that you know because it's still its function today is to store iron and to permit the release of iron under a ferrous status, which permits the the myriad of reactions that iron can do inside the cell, and which is so vital for the cell life. So we have seen what is the importance of iron in the origin of life, because without the possibility for the cell to use iron in the ferrous form, you could not have the persistence of life after the Great Oxygen Event, which produced a lot of ferric iron, unusable ferric iron. So let's turn now to the last part, which is iron and human society. when you consider iron and the human evolution, there are two main periods. There is the Iron Age, and the Iron Age consists essentially of iron homemade production in two main directions. One is the production of tools for the farmers, for instance, and the other is, of course, the production of weapons. And iron has been the basis, of course, for weapons for centuries and more than that. And after, you had around the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution. And then you have this era of very strong, powerful blast furnaces, which permitted all the applications of the iron in the modern, if you can say, human society. Just a few illustrations of this application of the Industrial Revolution. First, in iron and transportation. And we all know that iron had a major importance, impact on the railway. And this is just to illustrate the movie, The Iron Odyssey, which was directed by John Ford, and which retraced the creation of the first American transcontinental railway. But you have a lot of course, of other applications of iron. And a few words about iron and architecture. I will show you a few images illustrating that. This is an iron pillar of New Delhi. It's 3 tons of iron, pure iron, in New Delhi, which was probably erected to pay tribute to a kind of eulogy of a king, of an Indian king. And an enormous iron, pure iron structure. This one I have not to comment too much. And this one is also illustrates the Buckingham fence and gates, which are made of pure iron. Iron, of course, has been used for bridges, and I have some example of bridges. This is here the first iron bridges in England. It was the Iron Bridge in England. And you have here the Pont des Arts in Paris. Maybe you know the Pont des Arts. You know that here it's a painting by Paul Signac. And the Pont des Arts crosses the Seine River and links the Louvre Museum and the Institute of France. And the problem is that the Pont des Arts collapsed in 1971, as you can see here. And you can see on the right-hand side the Institute of France. And it has been, of course, rebuilt now. Another famous iron steel bridge is the Brooklyn Bridge. And other structure now, besides this bridge, you have the Atomium in Brussels. But please note that originally, this was not made of iron, but of aluminum. And it's only since the renovations that it's made of iron and steel. This you recognize, it's a bird nest, the Beijing Stadium, and the terminology bird nest is due to the fact that you have twisted section of iron of the steel roof. Here is the tallest building in the world, the Dubai Burj Khalifa, and it's 830 meters high. You know that there was a competitor which was supposed to be the Jeddah Tower, but it was stopped after 60 levels because of political and economical problems. This, you certainly recognize it, it's called the Flatiron Building in New York City. There are 2 reasons, at least, for making famous. The first one is really, it's made of steel. The second one is that really it has the shape of closest iron. And maybe the third reason for this building to be famous is that it's inside this building that, you know, Peter Parker, alias Spider-Man, had his headquarters as a photograph reporter. Always about the application of iron in our human society. Just a few words of iron and painting for two images. One is to recall that iron are used as pigments for painting, and the other one is probably a bit less known is what we call the Wu painting. It's a Chinese painting, very original, and it's a kind of combination of blacksmithing and calligraphy, and it's a three-dimensional picture, white and black picture, and you have here a partial view of the largest Wu painting in the world. Iron and sculpture, 2 or 3 images to illustrate. Here, it's with a hot air balloon. It's in Russia, and it has been, of course, inspired by the Jules Verne's novel. Here, it's a Iron Man, which is a Buddhist statue, which has a very special history. And you can see, if you look precisely, that at the center, you have a swastika. It's a reverse swastika, but you should know that this Buddhist statue has been brought back from Tibet to Germany by the Hitlerian regime, and you understand that they wanted to appropriate this symbol. Of course, they have a reverse swastika, but this Iron Man has a very special symbol. But you know that the original Indian swastika has a meaning, is a symbol of sun, of luck, but also of war. What is this? This is another Iron Man, but in US, in Minnesota. The statue is not iron, it's brass, but the basis of the statue is a massive iron structure. And the second iron meeting is to pay tribute to the iron miners of this region. This nice statue is called the Mother Kinsey. It's supposed to represent, to personify the Kiel River, which is a tributary of the Rhine. And it has a special history because it was erected on the bridge and over the Rhine, and during the war in 1870, it was immersed in the Rhine, and it was in fact saved from the waters almost 30 years later on. This is a guitar. It's more for Paul, for a musician. And this guitar is called the Rupali guitar. It's in Bangladesh. It has been built in the honor of a famous guitarist, famous in Bangladesh, I think. And it is it's only made of iron, 5 meters high, and 2 meters or 1.5 meters wide. And this is just as a transition for the last point of Iron and Society, which is Iron and Music. You have, as you know, a few instruments which are based only on steel, on iron, and they are here. On the left-hand side, it's what we call the danga, which is a bit the equivalent of precursor of the triangle. And here you all know this tongue, which resembles the Caribbean steel pan or steel soldiers. Okay, so it's what I wanted to say to you tonight about iron outside the relationship with health. And just to conclude, we can say that iron is a major player in the history of the universe, in the life emergence on Earth, in human destruction also because of his role in weapons, of course, in human well-being, we have seen, and of course also in human health. Okay, thank you for your attention. If you have a few questions, I will try to answer, but you know, it's a very large area, more than human health.
That's great. Thank you so much, Professor Brissot. Very interesting. Definitely a journey through space and time there. Okay. So great. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Pierre. I see you've become a very deep thinker in your retirement. And I would recommend you go on a space mission, maybe with Elon Musk in his own rocket.
Okay, I hope so. Thank you for the proposal. It's true that when you do not practice anymore clinical medicine, you have much more time to do other things that you can do during your professional career. It's clear. It's the same for you, I'm sure, Paul.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's great. Any other questions or comments?
Where's your book available? Is it on Amazon or something, or?
Yes, I did not want to specially speak of it, but you have two possibilities on Amazon. Either it's the Kindle ebook, okay, or you have also now a paperback, which is a small red book, and you can have on Amazon. Yes, it's just you have just to say to write Brissot, the Iron Odyssey, and it should appear. It should show up, I think.
And again, the name of the book is Iron Odyssey?
Yes, it's the Iron Odyssey, an amazing journey through space and time. Yes, Iron Odyssey.
Pierre, I wanted to mention that there's a very big meteorite that hit in Quebec in Charlevoix. And it's a very beautiful part of Quebec. I got to go there last year, and maybe some of the people on the call have more information, but it was something like 400 million years ago, and it has caused a large crater in the region, right on the north shore of the St. Lawrence River. And this is where the towns are built in this crater. And I tried to get more information about it when I was there, and most of the people had no idea what I was talking about. So there was a museum there on this topic, but it was closed.
Okay.
But if you look it up on the internet, you'll see that it's a big story in the history of Charlevoix. Maybe our guest from Quebec City would be the closest to it.
But you have no information on the nature of the meteorite, iron or not iron. You don't know. There was a meteorite, but
it's a big one.
A big one, but the nature is not documented. So, what is the region exactly?
Charlevoix.
It's in Charlevoix.
Charlevoix.
Yeah. Charlevoix, in the county, it's about 1 hour from Quebec City.
Okay. Okay, I will check also.
Sorry, and if you want to see the rim or part of the rim, because one part of the rim is on under the St. Lawrence River, but the other part you have to go and climb the Mont Éboulement, which is nearby the village which is called Les Éboulements.
Okay, okay.
It's very beautiful to see and interesting. But I don't know the nature, exactly the nature of the meteorite there.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
I could add.
100% clear. So in ferritin, it is the ferric that is being stored, not ferrous.
Yes, ferritin stores under the ferric form, and when you have needs of iron by the body, this ferric iron needs to be released through the pores of this eggshell protein, and in order to be able to cross the pores, it must be under a reduced form into ferrous iron, you know. It's why if you give, for instance, a reducing agent such as ascorbic acid, vitamin C, it's a way to release iron from the ferritin iron to go outside the cell and to be used by the body, for instance. And it's amazing to learn that, in fact, ferritin was present billions of years ago, you know. And that's what we have called siderophore is the equivalent of the transferrin today, because it permits to carry the iron inside the cell from the external milieu.
Does that mean that in hem iron and non-hem iron, is that HEME, the stuff that comes from meat, hem iron, and then there's the vegetable, which is non-hem iron.
What do you mean by NMAR is what? I don't understand the term.
HEME in English, I'm not quite sure what it is in French, but There's two types of iron. There's two types of iron in food, which is Hem and non-Hem. The Hem is
Oui.
HME.
The
It's more
difference
easily
between,
assimilated into the body.
the difference between heme iron and non-heme iron is what you
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So both forms of iron are absorbed by the duodenum, by the intestine. You know, heme iron is especially in meat, for instance, and non-heme iron is in the vegetables. And they bring iron in the different content of iron, ratio of iron, but it's used. And if you take an hemochromatosis patient, there's an increase in iron absorption, not only of non-heme iron, but also of heme iron. But it's always ignored because all the majority of the study are focused on non-heme iron, you know. But heme iron is also important to take into consideration also. But heme and non-heme is not the equivalent of ferric and ferrous. You know, these are different forms of iron.
No, thank you.
What you should know is that I insisted about this ferrous-ferric problem because in the body, only ferrous iron can cross the membranes. So if you have ferric iron in the duodenum, in the intestine due to the alimentation, the dietary, in order to be absorbed and to cross the cells of the duodenum, it needs first to be reduced in ferrous iron. So you have always this play of changing the redox state of the iron between ferrous and ferric. If it's ferric, it cannot cross the membrane. So it should be transformed in ferrous before crossing the membrane, then stored in ferritin, not to be toxic if it has become again ferric. So it's always a play between ferrous and ferric, and this is really vital, crucial for the evolution of life and the possibility of cells to be alive.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, very interesting perspective on iron.
A bit original. It changed a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Can I ask a question? I'm just trying to understand how this applies to hemochromatosis. So, you know, could you be very clear as to the direct link of, I understand the transformation for you to absorb it, but how are people with hemochromatosis, how is their evolution different in terms of that absorption?
Okay, I think the absorption by itself, the mechanism of absorption is not different, but it's the intensity of absorption which is increased in hemochromatosis. So it's an hyperavidity of the normal content of iron within the digestive tube. But the process of crossing the duodenum is the same as in a normal person. The only problem is a problem of regulation. It means that in hemochromatosis, the signal which determines the amount of absorption through the duodenum is abnormal. This signal, signal is the production of hepcidin, which is the hormone which regulates iron in the body. In hemochromatosis, you have a low production of hepcidin, which leads to an increased absorption of iron. But the process by itself is quite normal. It's the intensity of the flux of iron, which is increased due to the disturbance of the regulation, which corresponds due to the mutation of the chromosome, the mutation to a low hepcidin, which increases the absorption of iron.
Yeah, thank you. That was very clear. Thank you.
Paul, you any more comment about this?
No, I haven't reached this higher level of being yet. I'm working on it.
Okay.